Today, we are going to be focusing on the topic of photosynthesis. There are two vocab words that we need to make sure we know, autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are living things that are able to make their own food using either sunlight or chemicals. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, they are not able to make their own food, therefore they have to consume other living things to have their energy. Are plants autotrophs or heterotrophs? So, since they do photosynthesis, the topic we're talking about today, they're considered autotrophs. Plants use the process of photosynthesis to make their own food. The organelle that is the site of photosynthesis is the chloroplast. So, we've previously learned about this. Those are the small, kind of jelly bean shaped organelles inside of any type of cell that can do photosynthesis. Which part of this plant would have the highest concentration of chloroplasts? So when we look at that image on the right-hand side of the screen, we have different letters pointing to various parts of that tomato plant. And it's important to understand that any of the cells that would be actually absorbing sunlight would be the cells that would have a very high number of chloroplasts so that they can actually be doing photosynthesis using the sunlight. So it wouldn't make sense that you would have chloroplasts in the root cells because there's no sun down there. So it would be very wasteful for a cell to produce chloroplasts because there's no sun down there to do photosynthesis. Chloroplasts contain a light-absorbing pigment called chlorophyll. This is responsible for the green color of plants, and it helps convert solar energy to chemical energy. Why is chlorophyll green? Green light is not used by chlorophyll. Instead, it is reflected. So when you are looking at the green leaves, you are actually seeing that green wavelength of light reflecting off of those cells. That's the color of light that is not being used. All the other colors, like red, blue, yellow, those are all being absorbed and being used for photosynthesis. But the green light, that's what you see, so that's not used. It's reflected back into your eye. This question says, other than light, what else do plants need to do photosynthesis? So hopefully you know that they are going to need water, and there's also a gas that they have to take in, which is CO2, carbon dioxide. In photosynthesis, light energy is captured by chlorophyll. Light energy is converted to chemical energy. Chemical energy is stored in bonds in the sugar, which is glucose specifically. So that's what plants are trying to make at the end of this process. They're taking the sunlight energy and they're storing it into the bonds of glucose, that sugar. And where is all of this happening? This is happening in the chloroplasts, which are in these plant cells. Chloroplasts have two membranes. They have an inner membrane and an outer membrane. They're filled with a fluid called stroma. They have membranous discs called thylakoids, and a stack of thylakoids is called a granum. So you can think of like a stack of coins. If you have one coin, that's a thylakoid, and if you have a stack of them, that would make a granum. So again, plants, they're made out of plant cells, like this tomato plant here. Within their plant cells, you'll find a bunch of chloroplasts. If they are the green part of the plant would have the chloroplasts. That's where the sunlight's getting absorbed. The chloroplasts have an inner and outer membrane. The kind of jelly stuff, kind of like a cytoplasm in the cell, but the fluid jelly stuff that fills the chloroplast is the stroma. And then one disc in here is called a thylakoid, and a stack of them is the granum. The thylakoids, these are the discs. This is specifically where the chlorophyll is going to be found. So these things are green, giving chloroplast that green color that we know. Photosynthesis is actually broken down into two stages, the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. And these reactions are both in the chloroplast because they're photosynthesis, but they do happen in different parts of the chloroplasts. So the light-dependent reaction is in the thylakoid membranes, so those little like green pancakes that are all stacked up. And then the light-independent reaction is going to be in that fluid, that stroma that fills up the chloroplast. For the first part of photosynthesis, the light-dependent reaction, this is occurring in the thylakoid membrane, and water and sunlight are required for this first part of photosynthesis. And the sun energy, solar energy, is used to split apart the water molecule, which is going to release the oxygen gas that the plants would release, and we can breathe that in, so thank you, plants. And then it's also going to create some free electrons that would be necessary just to complete this reaction. And when you look at this diagram here, you can see some of these proteins embedded in the thylakoid membrane, and they're green because that is where the chlorophyll is specifically found. So if you look at the diagram, you see the green proteins, and that's where the light is getting absorbed because chlorophyll is the green pigment. That's where the light's getting absorbed, and then that energy is going to be used to run this first part of photosynthesis, the light-dependent reaction. And during this process, there are really two important things that are getting created here. Well, oxygen is getting created. That's released as a waste product. But at the end here, some things just popped up. There's one molecule that you're familiar with, ATP, and another one that's called NADPH. So these two molecules, you can think of these as being like batteries. These are energy storing molecules that are getting charged up using the sunlight, which is what the chlorophyll was just absorbing. So the four inputs of the light-dependent reaction, we have sunlight, water, which gets broken down to make oxygen, and the uncharged version of those molecules that are getting charged up here using the sun. And then the three outputs would be the oxygen that just got released from the water molecule, and then the two charged up molecules, NADPH and ATP. And you can think of those as being like little batteries, like rechargeable batteries that just got charged up using the sun. Stage 2 of photosynthesis is called the light-independent reaction, also the Calvin cycle, and this is happening in the stroma of the chloroplast, and this whole process is going to be run by those battery-like molecules that just got charged up using the sun in the light-dependent reaction. So the ATP and NADPH are now in the stroma, and they are going to be used to take that CO2 gas that the plant is bringing in, and it's going to change it and kind of rework the molecular structure of that molecule. And it's going to turn it into something called G3P, and then it's going to change it into something called RUBP. But the main thing that you need to know is that eventually this carbon containing molecule of carbon dioxide is going to get reworked to create glucose sugar, which is C6H12O6. So it's got that carbon in there. So the carbon is coming from carbon dioxide. So the three inputs of the light-independent reaction, we have carbon dioxide gas, and then also we have those two battery-like molecules that store energy, ATP and NADPH, and those are really the driving forces behind this process here, taking that CO2 and turning it into the sugar, which is one of the outputs here of the light-independent reaction, and that is really the whole point of photosynthesis as a whole. The goal that the plant has is to take in all of these inputs, water, sunlight, and CO2, and turn that into glucose sugar. And that is actually happening in the light-independent reaction. So that's where the glucose, which is a sugar, is getting created. And then the other two outputs, sugar is an output. If I said input, that was not right. Sugar is getting made. But the other two outputs would be ADP and NADP plus, which are just the uncharged version of the charged up molecules that we saw as the inputs. So if you think of ATP and NADPH as being like rechargeable batteries, then ADP and NADP plus are the batteries that are uncharged. So you got to put them on the charger to, fill them up with power again so they can be used. Based on what we just learned about the two stages of photosynthesis, what is the complete formula of photosynthesis? So plants are taking in that carbon dioxide gas, CO2, and water, which is H2O, and they're using solar energy from the sun and using that to create glucose sugar, and then oxygen gas, which can be released, or remember, plants also have mitochondria, so it can go directly into the mitochondria to do cellular respiration. And this is our equation for photosynthesis.